I had a problem at work the other day where a young colleague came to me with a report that was just far too detailed. It was boring to read, and I wanted to share with you guys in this video about how we can make our reports more interesting to read, and some of the tips that I gave this young guy about helping make a report that people are actually going to want to read, because making writing interesting and making a report interesting is what I find a key component. Because how would you feel if you're given a report that's just boring to read? You're going to forget it straight away. So I wanted to really teach this guy, and I want to teach you in this video as well, about some of the techniques that I've used to cut through the detail in a report and make it more engaging for an audience. Because what's the purpose of writing a report that people aren't going to read? So that's what I do on this channel. My name's Chris. I'm a professional and consultant and engineer who likes to share the tips and tricks that I've learned over the years to improve the way I work, to improve professionals such as yourself. Because and in a professional setting, writing a report like this is really about communicating a point that you want to get across. Because otherwise, why would we write reports? Again, in a professional setting, I know there are plenty of reasons to write a report that no one's going to read. But in a, say, professional consulting or engineering setting, the background that I come from, the purpose of writing a report is to make a point and communicate that point to a bunch of people. And particularly in this day and age, I feel that communication is something that really needs to be emphasized. So that's why I wanted to share with you in this video the tools and tips and tricks that I've imparted on this young engineer to try to help him improve his report writing in the future. And key to this improvement was to really get to the point quicker. And I've talked about this in a few videos, that to put your key point up front, to get straight to the point that you want to get across, and that makes sure that your message is communicated. So, and sometimes I've talked about reviews as well. When you're reviewing a report, think about what your message is and what you want to communicate out of it. But that was really key to this guy's report, that he'd had his point. He understood his point well, and he'd spent so many pages, so many paragraphs of his report setting up the point, setting up the background, setting up what he'd done, talking about what he'd done, his methodology, talking about the people involved, talking about all these other sorts of things. And it was about 3/4 of the way through the report where he finally had that, aha, I know what he's talking about now moment. And it was my job to review this report, and of course the person who the client we're submitting this to, it will be their job to read this report. That's what they're being paid for. But to make it more engaging, to get your point across more quickly, people will appreciate that. I've often found that, say you're submitting a report to the busy executive who sit there with very little free time to read your report. If you give them the option to engage with your message as much or as little as possible by reading your report, they're really going to feel better about what you've written. And by saying engaging with it as little as much as they wish, giving them that option, I found the best way to do that is by including a summary. I mean, that's at the core of why we include executive summaries in reports, or why we summarize the data that we've put together, or we summarize our results. Why we put in a summary is to give the reader the option to engage as much or as little as they want. And that was part of the advice that I gave this guy, to include a summary. But it was the way we worked together to include the summary that I really wanted to share in this video. And those, I'll get to the point quickly, because those 3 ways were lists, figures and tables. But I want to get through, I've done another video about how to put these things together, but I wanted to get through in this video about how to use those to make a report more engaging and more readable. Because putting a list together, putting pictures and tables, I mean, anyone can say that. Put in a list. Okay, great. Well, what do you turn into the list? How do you use that list to make it more engaging? And what if you just end up burying your audience in lists instead of burying them in paragraphs? Is that really going to help? So when to use a list? Good for things that you can categorize. So any time where, sometimes lists can be obvious. So for example, this guy had big paragraphs of text that had lists buried inside them. And of course you can pull out that list of items and make it into bullet points. But better yet, take a look for anything where you're talking about different categories, or you're talking about a comparison between 3 or 4 different items. And that's the opportunity where you can put a list in. And that list can be, if you put that at the top, at the front of the paragraphs, before all that paragraph of detail, then you've got your summary. And by putting a summary first, before the paragraph of information, you can give the reader the option on how much they're going to read. And I think that's the message I want you to take away from this video, that key to getting a message across is to give the reader the option for how much or how little they want to read. And that way, if your report's given to, yes, your report's going to be given to the audience that you know about, but if that audience shares around your report, you're engaging a much wider audience. So putting that list, putting that summary, however you're summarizing the detail, put the summary up front and then go into further detail below that. So it was really this opportunity to focus the writing for this young guy. Apart from lists, I also helped him identify where you can put in pictures. And pictures can be good for wherever you've got a sequence of steps. You should put a picture or a figure in. Figure's probably a better example because this was an engineering consulting background. So we're not talking about painting pictures. We're talking about flow charts, or we're talking about timelines. We're talking about the sorts of figures that are going to help to explain your point, to put those into the report where you can help to summarize a big paragraph of information in a simple figure. I think that was sort of the second key goal of what I was trying to get this guy to do, was to cut down the number of paragraphs but retain the information. So to cut down the number of paragraphs, we've got the lists. To retain the information, we're going to use a figure. So when to use a figure is whenever you have a timeline, you can use a figure. So you can represent a series of steps over time. Any timeline can be represented as a figure. And any sequence of steps, any how-to, or any if this, then do that, if something else, do another thing. Any sequence like that can be represented by a flowchart. In the case of this report, we didn't have to get too technical on what type of flowchart to use or to use the right symbols, just a simple flowchart to illustrate the way a series of steps rely on each other. And that was enough to replace 2 or 3 paragraphs of text. Of course, we can still go into detail in those paragraphs, and that was something I recommended to him. Maybe throw in a bit of formatting as well to highlight where the key information is. But to focus on removing the detail from the report, teasing out the detail in those paragraphs, summarizing it in a figure, putting that figure on top and saying, here's what we're going to do. So right underneath the heading for whichever section in the report he's writing, he puts in a nice figure that explains the answer underneath that heading, and then he goes into some more detail. That way the audience, when they're flicking through the report, okay, they can read that figure and simply comprehend what's going on. So similarly, this report was full of figures, full of numbers, I should say, full of numbers when I say figures in this case. I mean, this report was just full of numbers. There were numbers everywhere, numbers about what he'd analyzed, numbers about his results, all sorts of things. And I say, okay, well, whenever you see a lot of numbers, try a table or a graph. So graph figures, same sort of thing, we talked about that already. But putting it in a table gives you the option to associate data, associate numbers with those categories that you put in a list. And I did some research before I spoke to him, sort of tangentially to this issue, but I found the Google explanation of when to use tables, when to format tables and lists is actually quite good. So there's a Google style guide out there for doing websites, because that's what Google does. And it talks about when you should use a list, when you have a list of items, when you should use a table, when you have 3 or more things to associate with each list item, for example. And I highly recommend going to Google and taking a look at this style guide so that you can see for yourself about when you can use tables. Because this was a great example of when to use a table to cut out some of the detail in this report, was to get that information out, put the figures and associate that with the different categories that each figure belongs to, and put that in a table. So then again, the whole purpose here is that busy executive who's flicking through the report is going to just read the headings, read the figures, read the tables, maybe read some of the lists, and they're done. They've got your message. So focusing the message on the point, focusing the report on the point of the message was kind of the goal that I was trying to work towards here with helping this young professional put together his lists, his pictures, his figures, graphs, tables. And I think that's the message I want you to take away from this video. And sorry I don't have my usual graphics and things with me, because I did another video about this below where I actually walked through with an example of how to put paragraphs and tables and figures into a report. I built up a report previously on this table, professional engineering consulting report, where I'll show you how to put in headings and how to put in figures and tables and how to turn a paragraph of text into tables. So if you're interested in that video, I'll leave a link below. Because this video is really about summarizing how you can put together a summary, how you can pull out technical detail from a report and make it more interesting to read. And the way you do that is by using lists, pictures or figures, and tables. So hopefully I've given you a bit of an overview here of how you can help out your own reports that way. Something for you to look out for in your own writing when you're writing a professional report, to make sure that the writing that you do is on message. And to help bring that message across, consider other ways of presenting the information, like lists, tables, and figures. If you're interested in more ways that I can help you write reports, please hit the like button on this video, because then I'll get to an understanding of what you like to see. Otherwise, you can leave a comment below, any questions or queries you have, and I'll be happy to help you out. So my name's Chris, and this is Engineered Upgrade, where I like to share those tools and tips and tricks that I've developed over the years as an engineering consultant to help improve your professional life, to help improve your professional communication, and overall to help you work better. So hopefully I'll see you in the next video.